Well, welcome to the podcast. And you know what? At the start of the year, I told everyone we're going to do things a little bit different this year. Yep, we're still talking to people about journeys of success. But today we're going to speak to someone who is from LA, of course, California, the USA. He's a digital production expert. But more importantly, he's used what his growing up experience was like, good and bad, to fund and to absolutely supercharge his success in life. He's just written a new book. Welcome to the show, Imani Kaliid. How are you, mate?
Very good, Rob. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Buddy. I'm excellent. I'm excellent. So you're still living in LA?
Yeah, still here in sunny, well, nowadays, sometimes sunny California.
Yeah.
It could be worse, but yeah, still in LA.
So you grew up there, mate?
Yeah, born and raised. Originally from what people may recognize as South Central Los Angeles, which is the inner city.
Yeah.
But now I live more towards the let's call it West LA area, which is near Beverly Hills, near Pico Robertson. For anybody familiar with like the geography. Yeah.
And where's your heritage from?
African American. African American. Kind of a mixed pot. With our family. We have Creole blood. We have Chinese. I mean, and you won't pick that up just looking at me. But yeah, like my father's mother was half Chinese. We have some Italian. We have some Native American. There's just tons of different stuff. Like I haven't done the 23andMe DNA test yet, and God knows what that'll come up. But like if you look at some of the photos in our family, you'll see just different bone structure, different looks. So just a potpourri of blood.
Mate, very, very similar to a lot of people in Australia these days. And I think a lot of people around the world don't realize the Chinese were here very early on when we were starting out in Australia. They were there in the goldfields. So Chinese themselves have been in Australia a long time. And these days it's, you see people of all, you look at them and you assume they're one and they come out with the biggest Australian accent and you look at them and go, wow. And it's quite funny. It's when you assume someone looks a certain way, must speak a certain way, and then it's the exact opposite. You go, maybe I need to really have a look at what I'm doing.
Right.
So you got a big family?
A big family. By today's standards, maybe. Like I'm the youngest of 4 children. And I guess maybe by today's standards, that's a little bit bigger than the 2 or 3 kids some people may have. But generally, I guess the short answer is kinda, if you want to look at 4 kids or 4 siblings, that's a big family.
But so before you got into the digital world, which is what your normal job is, a lot of us have only seen from around the world on movies and how they portray LA back in the days when you were growing up. Can you tell our audience what it was like as a little kid, a primary school kid, as we call it, growing up in what a lot of people would have thought was a pretty rough, average area of America?
Right. Very good question. So a lot of what's portrayed on media and television, when you think of South Central LA or the inner city of LA, what comes to mind with a lot of people is the violence. Which is true, but what escapes people is that there's a spectrum of experiences and personalities in LA. There are people who are prideful in their home ownership. They're prideful in education. They are speaking with great grammar like we were raised. And our mother demanded this upon us. But, you have certain expectations from people that everybody's violent. In fact, one of the strange things that I get is people assume that I had a Cosby family type upbringing, and I always go, well, which Cosby upbringing are you talking about? The guys accused of all these hideous things, or are you talking about the TV portrayal? So they'll think of that. But like growing up in LA, it was a mix of good times and love and enjoyment, but unfortunately, there is this mix, this what I would describe as an emotional minefield,
Yeah.
and meaning that there is a presence of domestic violence. There was a presence of street violence, and
Mm.
sometimes violence just finds you, whether it be through criminal means or through police brutality. So, I mean, the short line on that, it's there's a lot of positives. Like, I don't think I would be the man that I am today uh,
Mm.
without some of those experiencing some of those challenges. But then also, there was the hindrance of fear and crime and violence, and you just really, as a child, you try to make sense of it and do the best that you can.
How was it? You obviously, listening to you before, of course, we hit the record button. You spoke about your family and your love and all that. If you've got a family at home that's full of love and kindness, and then you walk out the front door and all you see is violence, how does a young child process that? I mean, they've got to walk to school. They've got to go to school and see people being violent to each other. And it's a contradiction in many cases, not every case, many cases at home. Then sometimes it goes over into the home. How does a young child process that?
It was very challenging
Yeah.
because looking at my own family,
Yeah.
where I knew I was loved and we all knew
Yeah.
we were loved. But the fact of the matter is that my parents came from a generation, like my father served in World War II,
Yeah.
and he was a bit older than my mother. But in hindsight, my parents were lacking some emotional tools to teach us to how to adjust.
Yeah.
And this is not a criticism of my family or a
No.
criticism of my parents. It's just a fact, because my parents came from a generation of heavy racism
Yeah.
and heavy discrimination and abuse through family, through local governments,
Hmm.
especially in the rural South,
Yeah.
where my parents come from. So it's I would characterize it as the same thing I would say about parenthood. I'm not a parent, but there's no handbook to teach you how to be a parent.
That's true. That's true.
So with inner city life, it's just a matter of, you just have to live it and improvise and grow and adjust based on whatever your situation is. I didn't come from what I would call a heavily politically aligned street family.
Right.
Like, we were working class people, but we weren't aligned tightly with this gang and this motorcycle gang and these heavily influential people in the neighborhood.
Mm.
We were the family that people liked and people knew, but we didn't have strong, I want to call it, political affiliations, if that's making sense. So you just really carefully walk that line to not get yourself hurt.
So would you call that survival mode?
It was heavy survival mode.
Yeah.
Heavy and exhausting.
Yeah. It's true. If you look at it now, with the benefit of hindsight, we see a lot of people who've been treated bad based on race or color or by police or just by, well, you're from that area, you're automatically bad. Do you think that sometimes then kids revert to, they say, well, they expect me to be mean, they expect me to be violent or a thief, so that's what I'm going to do?
Yeah. Yes. And there's colorism, not only, I mean, there's colorism in the other way, but there's colorism in the African-American culture, which dates back to the slavery times, where you have light complexion Blacks having an adversarial relationship with darker complexion Blacks, darker than myself. So, but yeah, there is an expectation for some people amongst each other and from outsiders, like, for you to fit a certain profile and be engaged with certain levels of hostile interaction or hostile violence.
Mm.
Like my dominating personality is to be a nice guy, to have, like the way you and I were chatting before we hit the record button. Like that's my dominating personality. But there's another part of me that a lot of people don't know about. And there's a learn it and a necessary part of me being a man that if there's going to be a fight for the death, you're going to lose. Yeah. Don't listen. Like, stop listening to my manicured English. There's a part of me you don't want to see.
Yeah.
And I can share many anecdotes to convince you of that, real life anecdotes. And there's been life or death moments that that has made me seasoned to demonstrate that. So, but back to your original point, there is an expectation, and some of us do a good job of rejecting that expectation, and then other people succumb to it.
Yeah, we'll go into that a little bit further, because all of this really is about sort of it's the basis of the book you wrote, and then there was violence. If we look at the domestic violence side of it first, in Australia, there was a lot of it. We call them truck drivers and miners. They were violent towards their spouse and their children because that's the way they were brought up, and it was expected of them. And that's horrible. And they look at it, even I was speaking to people who were like it, they look back now and they're embarrassed about how they behaved towards their wives and their children. But at the time they knew no better. And with COVID around the world, we've seen a massive increase in domestic violence because people are stuck in their homes, they're frustrated, they've lost their jobs, or one person's thing. Where you grew up, did you see maybe not the same reasons, but the same things happening with families and domestic violence of one partner, be it male or female? Because, I mean, there is a myth out there that it's only men that are violent towards women. A lot of women can be just as violent towards men, and there's no excuse on either way. Did you see any of that firsthand, or did you see that coming along as you were growing up?
I saw tons of it as early as the age of 5. I saw it in our home with my own parents, engaging in fist fights, gunplay, very aggressive language. And then I saw it with some of my peers. You know, there's no shortage of memories of seeing an ambulance pull up to one of my peers' home, or you seeing the police getting engaged or involved with a domestic abuse, or you see a physical confrontation or a fist fight with a couple spilling out of the home and into the street, and then everybody's out of their homes looking at it. So, like, when I was seeing all this, I knew, you know, like initially I thought it was just something happening in our home, but as I grew with age, I saw it happening in other homes. Like, oh my God, this is happening with my friend over here, and this older peer, and this couple, and that couple, and oh, now it's happening to this couple's children's romantic relationship. So it was unfortunately a part of life, and you know, unfortunately, people were socialized to engage with that same level of interaction.
So you spoke about you had to do what you had to do to survive where you were, and that's a part of you that is still part of you, but it's not around anymore. Was there a time when you were growing up where you thought, I can make a choice here? I can be passive and probably get beaten up, or I can choose to defend myself and don't be walked over, because that's what the area is that I live in, that I have to do?
Yeah, and what that reminds me of, and I'll try to make this a shorter answer. Like,
no, go for it.
Okay, well, in storytelling, and some people may not be as obsessed with it as I am, but in storytelling, you have the main character.
Yeah.
And you have what's called the willing hero, and you have the unwilling hero. Like, you can read, I forget the author's name, but it's called The Hero's Journey.
Yep.
And so you have the willing hero, the unwilling hero. When it came to violence, I was the unwilling hero. I didn't want that. And
Many say they're the most dangerous.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Because we're suppressive and we're bottling it up, and then we have interaction after interaction accumulating and mounting up until there's a tipping point.
Yeah.
So in our neighborhood, there was people who, violence was recreational for them. But for me, I was always looking for a way to avoid it. And sometimes that was perceived as, oh, he's weak. He doesn't want to fight. He's weak. And it's like, no, I feel sorry for you if you get tangled up with me.
Yeah.
And I feel sorry for you, God help you, if I'm going to leverage all the years of violence that I've seen that are now in my repertoire.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but that was, for me, that was always, and I wasn't the only one who had that mindset. Like that was always what I resented about the people in my neighborhood and even strangers as I got older. It's a thing of, I saw the scope of what can happen and how things can fall out with violence. And the worst case scenario is death. A little bit less of that is you losing a finger, which I saw, or you being crippled or handicapped for life, which I saw. It was happening. So that was always a constant source of resentment from me, a constant source of frustration, and it even spilled over into my adult life.
Was these days a lot of it's drug fueled, as in selling drugs or being on drugs. Back then, was there anything that was fueling it apart from the social circumstances?
Yeah, drug was a big drugs and alcohol was a big driver. Lack of economic prosperity was a driver.
Yeah.
Inferior communication tools and social tools was a huge driver as well. And then for a lot of people, a very low or complete lack of self-awareness and insecurity.
Yeah.
And a lot of those elements in hindsight just fueled some of these flare-ups with people on a regular basis. One, there's like certain archetypes in our neighborhood. You have different kind of people who with just they would get into a different fight or a different flare-up, but they were just different characters in those little mini movies. There's the guy who always thinks someone betrayed him and stole money from him. He would get into those same kind of fights.
Yeah.
There was the woman who was insecure about her romantic relationship and always thought another woman was trying to steal her man, so to speak. So there's that archetype. There's like so many different ones, but it all boils down to people, man, just not having the tools. And one thing I think that distinguished myself and other people is I wanted to be better. Like I didn't want I didn't want a part of that activity. I wanted and craved and yearned and was starving for more peace, even as a young man. Like my father's nickname for me was, well, one of them was Old Man. Yeah. And he said that I had an old spirit and I was wise. And my older sister says that about me too. Like I desperately wanted peace. And so how that played into my life was I was exercising some creativity and creatively figure out how to not be in those situations and how to potentially communicate with people who were willing to communicate with me to diffuse a situation to where we didn't get in a fight and get suspended from school, or we didn't get to a place where something was going to escalate and I would have to fight one or two people, or we didn't escalate things to where now our families were at odds with each other.
Now, before we dive into the book, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I want you to answer completely honestly, because I like it when people who have been there actually tell it as it is, not the version we hear in the press or from the politicians or from the movie people. What was the scariest thing you saw growing up in LA? Or one of the most scariest things you grew up when you grew up there? there'd be something that'd be,
There's two
yeah,
there's two moments that
yep,
stand out. The first moment was in our home, and this is in the book. The scariest thing I saw was my mother throw a pot of boiling water on my father, and then a fist fight ensued. I was about 8 years old.
yep,
In the streets, the scariest thing that I saw was the aftermath of this massive fighting between two rival gangs. And for
yep,
those who are not aware of LA gangs, two of the biggest sets of gangs
yep,
are the Bloods and the Crips.
yep,
And this was a result of a lunchtime fight / stabbing, where when some Crips visited our school and the Bloods beat them to a bloody pulp, stabbed one of the guys, and the payback that ensued in the next 48 hours, the Crips just went on drive-by shooting sprees. And so hearing automatic machine guns fire from one night, and then seeing bullet shell casings in the street, and a dead body in front of our high school, and hearing from other of our peers from other neighborhoods in different gang territories about who they lost through death and who was shot or terrorized in that 48-hour period was
mate. Thank you so much for sharing, because that's part of your journey, and it's part of where we've got to.
Yeah. If I can add one thing,
if
I can add one thing, like that was a tipping point where I was wondering if I would live.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're looking back at that, what was the moment that you said to yourself, I got to get out of here? As in, this is not for me. You're a very successful person now. You made a choice. A lot of people, everyone makes choices in life. They can make excuses for the choices they made, but you made the choice to go one way or the other. Now, you chose a different path. You honor and you acknowledge your history before, and the experiences you've had, which I think is absolutely brilliant. But what was the moment you turned around and said, I've got to make a change. I need to get away from all this, be it physically or through work? What happened? When did that all happen?
After that 2-day terror, I was 16 years old. And before that, I didn't, I knew that I wanted out, but I didn't know how, because what's challenging is the lack of the perceived lack of opportunity and the portrayal of opportunity to Black people. Still to this day. And we don't see people of color in successful positions like we should, and many of us are capable. But after that 2-day terror, what was working in my advantages is that was a stage of life where I knew I was good enough to get a basketball scholarship. And go off to college. But after that 2-day period, because I knew I was good enough, that was the moment where it became almost like its own reality TV show. It's like, okay, I gotta figure out how to continue to improve as a student athlete. And the B story in that is I got to figure out how to not die. So that was really a tipping point in me focusing on staying alive, staying productive on the courts, keeping my grades up, and then getting a scholarship somewhere to go, God knows where, to get out of there.
Now, the book you've released is called There Was Violence. Why the book and why now?
I never wanted to be an author. I love writing. The short or the condensed version of that story is there was a moment. There's a beach city here called Marina del Rey. And I was leaving a restaurant. I was going to do my grocery shopping. And there was this gentleman, younger, a little bit younger, a little bit bigger. I'm 6'4", 220 pounds. I'm not a small man. But there was a bigger, younger guy who appeared angry at me, appeared that he was looking at me, and that he was coming for me. So I went back into survival mode, because what I was seeing represented other instances where I had a street altercation with somebody I didn't know was angry at me.
Yep.
Or it represented other people who got into, seeing other street altercations develop. So the long and short of it, I was wrong about that. I felt like an idiot. And something told me to explore that. And I began exploring that by journaling and reflection. And 3 months later, I had this 90,000 word document.
Yep.
And the common thread was there was violence, not myself, but from people in my family. And then the thought was, I got to do something with this. I have to leverage it. And if this has happened to me, God knows what's happening to other people. So it was an exercise in sharing my story for awareness and education, and encouraging people to explore their own violent trauma. And so then I published the book, and it's become a passion project to help people disrupt the violent trauma in their lives.
Is there when you look back now, do you think if you hadn't gone through what you went through, you could have now achieved what you're doing?
I wouldn't have had the frame of reference or the perspective to advocate and share firsthand stories of the trauma and the healing and the benefits of healing afterwards. I don't know how I could have ever achieved that. So I don't know what my life would have looked like, but I have to say there are positives coming from that. I've been to nearly 20 countries. I don't go anywhere feeling like I can't defend myself or feeling unsafe. I don't know where I would have gotten my mental toughness from had I not gone through that. And there's a lot of benefits to that.
Mate, that's interesting. If you look back now, a lot of people will read your book, and I hope they do, and I'll put all the links in the show notes. That they've got to understand is, if they're reading it from the outside looking in, they'll have their own perceptions about what you say. But what you write in the book is the perception of someone on the streets looking out. You perceive this is wrong, that is wrong. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. If that's how you see the world, that is what you experience. Looking back at that's the same area now, what would you say to a 16-year-old that may pick up your book and have a read, or you're talking on the corner to a kid, and there is still the violence there, there's still the drugs, everything, it's everywhere in the world, and he says, what do I do? I'm stuck. What would you say to him? You've been there, you've done it.
Yeah, I would say to that person, there's no one path of coping and recovery for anybody. Do what feels natural and appropriate. And that could mean you talk to a spiritual leader, or a religious leader. You talk to a guidance counselor, you talk to a family member, whatever. Some of the best advice I can give is, number one, deal with the discomfort. But deal with it at a pace that's sustainable for you. Go as fast as you need to, or go as slow as you need to. The second thing is commit to being creative, and commit to alternatives you may not have ever would have considered. But then also, and this is my favorite pillar, don't misinterpret this process of being uncomfortable as being wrong. Lots of goodness comes from discomfort. Most of what I do in my life is uncomfortable, but what you have to realize that any any type of healing, whether it's after surgery or a broken leg or a dental surgery
Yeah.
or a broken heart, that there's no getting around that discomfort. And
No.
I think what a lot of young people do, especially, is they start feeling that discomfort and then they shy away from it. And what you're doing with that is you're delaying the healing, and which means that that pain is now in a thriving environment where it could potentially expand and spill over into other parts of your life and stop you from growing professionally, romantically, socially. It's going to create probably a lesser version of yourself. So don't shy away from the pain. Be open-minded. Keep your feet moving is what I say.
Do you think a lot of people use their circumstance of where they grew up and what happened to them as an excuse not to succeed?
I know people do for a fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand why. I don't agree with it. Like, I understand that it's painful of looking at what I call the ugly mirror.
Yeah.
Like, you're looking at the ugliness of yourself and the ugliness of your circumstance. And it's uncomfortable knowing some truths about yourself.
Yeah.
And it's easier to attach yourself to an alternate narrative that doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
Like, if you're an alcoholic and you want to say you've deserved drinking these 5 shots because you've worked hard, then now you're just creating a false narrative that's not really going to serve you. So, I think some of the other reasons that people do that is because they're getting the wrong counsel from people.
True. Yeah.
Which is why it's so crucial that you continuously evaluate the counsel in your life through friends and family members and get loving truth, but honest, candid truth about who you are. I seek feedback from the people that are close to me all the time. Yeah. I don't always like hearing what the feedback that I'm given, but it's an opportunity for me to be the best version of myself as possible.
So this one you're going to feel uncomfortable with. Why are you different? You chose and you've become successful. Where I'm sure there are other people out there the same age of you that have gone down a very, very sad route. So what makes you different?
I grew up with those people. I've seen those people. Some of those people are in my family. The simple truth is, for whatever reason, you want to call it genetics or DNA, I was born different. If you want to look at it from a spiritual point of view, God made me different. But the key driver in this is that I never stopped wanting to produce the best version of myself. I still learn. I still do things that are hard, like learn languages or learn to code or learn a different business workflow. I don't know where that drive comes from, but I mean, inherently, I just want to be better today. I compare myself today with the guy from yesterday. Forget about everything else, or whoever's on social media showing you the glitz and glam of your life. I don't care about that. I'm comparing myself to how I was in the past, and I continue that streak. And some days I fail, but overall, if you're talking on a 7-day period, if I can improve myself 5 out of those 7 days, then I feel good about it. So it's like you gotta win. Like I played basketball, and I had a coach who would always say, you have to want to play defense. And if you want to play defense, that's going to shine through with what you're learning and absorbing. That's going to shine through in your productivity. You just have to commit over a long time where it's sustainable. Don't look for quick fixes.
So if someone picked up your book and they turned around and said to you, mate, what's one message you want me to get out of reading this book? What would you tell them? Because every book's got a different meaning and it means different to every person who reads it. So look at it through their own eyes.
If there was one message I think what people get out of it is, I have to go back to keep your feet moving. And let me clarify what I mean by that.
Yes.
That's not my quote. So in American football, there was a Hall of Fame, highly regarded running back named Walter Payton.
Yes.
And his nickname was Sweetness because he was so grateful yet so powerful.
Yeah.
And as was told to me, because he had these records he had for a very long time. Supposedly, a reporter asked him about this acclaimed career, like, "Hey, Walter, what was the success? What's the key to your success?" And he says, "I always kept my feet moving." And he meant that in a figurative and a literal sense. Like in the literal sense, if you watch some video of him, he always kept his feet moving, which is a keystone, which is a cornerstone to all athletics, having good footwork.
Yeah.
But in the figurative sense, he always stayed productive and active. And that's what you have to do. And that's how I came out on the other side of a majority of my violent trauma and exploring my, leveraging my natural curiosity for the world and life. I always stayed active. That's why I know so much about so many things. And that's why I'm so good at so many things. I didn't accept that me as a Black man in America, that I have to do one thing, that I have to be a pro athlete, or that I have to father kids by several different women. I rejected all those narratives. And instead, I explored my curiosity. I kept active. I failed at a lot of things. I'm bad at a lot of shit, man. But that's a part of the journey of, and Google, credit to Google, they have a saying where they say, let's fail fast and let's fail hard and fail fast.
Yeah.
So we can know what we need to explore, and then let's get to the next thing or the next venture. I think it's called Moonshot is the segment of segment of their company. So, but I didn't know I was doing this at the time. This is me looking back.
Yeah.
Something kept me failing and trying and exploring and being curious. So yeah, I mean, for everybody, I don't care what your religion is, your political affiliation is, just keep active. Give yourself breaks when you need to, but keep active, keep trying stuff, keep doing. Stop thinking so much. You don't have to overthink everything. Get out there and do it.
Yeah, mate. What I say when I'm doing my sales coaching is, it's better to swing and miss than to be carrying the oranges.
I like that. I might use that.
Mate, go for your life. I mean, no one remembers who carried the oranges on there, but if you swing and spectacularly stuff up, they're still going to remember you.
Right. I so agree with that. So agree.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Where can people get your book?
So if you are looking for a paperback, ebook, an audiobook, which I recorded myself, you can go right to Amazon.com, search There Was Violence. The audiobook is also on Apple Books. The ebook is also on Google Books. And if you ever get lost and don't know where to go, just go to therewasviolence.com and you'll be able to get the books there.
Mate, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I love your honesty. Never lose it. It's something that you need to keep. It's been fantastic hearing the real stories of someone growing up in this part of the world. You have an awesome day. And as we say at the end of every one of our podcasts, have a groovy day.
It's been good. Thank you so much, Rob. I enjoyed this.